All right, ready to dive into some Gnosticism? Want to explore how they viewed humanity?
Oh, it gets interesting.
Buckle up, because, yeah, it gets really interesting.
It really does. What's fascinating about Gnosticism is, this core idea that the material world, the one we experience with our senses, it isn't the whole picture.
Right.
It's like a shadow play compared to the true spiritual reality.
Okay, so it's not just a different religion, it's a whole different way of seeing existence.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
And this perspective really comes through in how they categorized people. They saw humanity not as good or bad, but on a spectrum of spiritual awareness.
Okay.
With these three distinct types: Hylic, psychic, and pneumatic.
Now, I've heard those terms before, but honestly, they always sounded a bit intimidating, like something out of a philosophy textbook. Break it down for me. What are these types really all about?
I hear you, they do sound a bit lofty, but they're actually rooted in some pretty simple ideas.
Yeah.
Let's start with the Hylic type. The word itself comes from the Greek hyle, which means matter. So right off the bat, we're talking about a focus on the physical world.
Okay, so far so good. But does that mean everyone who enjoys, say, a nice meal or a cool gadget is automatically a Hylic type?
Not necessarily. It's more about where your primary focus lies, what truly drives you.
Right.
Imagine that friend who's always chasing the latest trends, obsessed with material possessions and external validation. That's getting closer to the Hylic mindset.
Interesting. So it's not just about enjoying material things, it's about being completely absorbed by them, almost like they define your whole reality.
Right. From the Gnostic perspective, Hylics are seen as deeply entrenched in the material world, kind of sleepwalking through life without really questioning the nature of reality or their place in it.
Yeah.
They may engage in rituals or follow religious doctrines, but it's more out of habit or social pressure than a true understanding of their spiritual significance.
Yeah. So in a way, they're kind of stuck at the starting line of this spiritual journey the Gnostics are talking about.
You could say that.
Yeah.
But it's important to remember that Gnosticism doesn't see this as a value judgment. It's not about condemning the Hylic type.
Right.
Instead, it's about recognizing this stage as a natural part of the human experience.
Okay. That makes sense. It's not that Hylics are bad, it's just that they haven't woken up to the deeper reality beyond the physical world yet.
Precisely. And this is where the next type, the psychic, comes in. Remember how I said that hyle means matter?
Mm-hmm.
Well, psychic comes from psyche, the Greek word for soul.
Okay.
So we're talking about a shift in focus, a movement inward.
So we're starting to climb the spiritual ladder a bit here, getting a little less fixated on the material world.
Exactly. The psychic type is more introspective, more in tune with their thoughts and emotions.
Okay.
They're the ones who ask the big questions, the ones who are constantly searching for meaning and knowledge. Think of those late-night conversations about the universe.
Yeah.
Those deep dives into philosophy or spirituality, that's tapping into that psychic energy.
And that sounds kind of like a good thing, right? Like, isn't seeking knowledge and asking questions a positive trait?
It absolutely can be. However, the Gnostics saw a potential pitfall for psychic types.
Okay.
While they've moved beyond the purely material focus of the Hylics, they can get trapped in their own minds,
Oh, I see.
in a world of intellectual concepts and abstract ideas.
Oh, I see what you mean. Like, they're so busy thinking about spirituality that they forget to actually experience it.
That's a great way to put it.
Yeah.
They can get caught in intellectualism, mistaking knowledge for wisdom. They might study ancient texts or debate theological concepts, but without that direct experiential connection to the divine, that Gnosis that Gnosticism is all about.
So they're like the student who can ace all the tests but still misses the point of the lesson.
Yes, they can get lost in their heads, mistaking the map for the territory, if you will.
Right.
And this makes them, in a way, stuck between worlds.
Stuck between worlds. That sounds a little ominous. What exactly do you mean by that?
Well, think of it like this. The Hylic type is fully immersed in the material world, the world of senses and tangible things.
Yeah.
And then on the other end of the spectrum, there's this pure spiritual realm that the Gnostics believed in. The psychic type is kind of caught in the middle, straddling these two realities. They're not fully grounded in the material, but they haven't fully grasped the spiritual either.
Wow, so they're on this tightrope walk, trying to balance between the physical and the spiritual? That sounds like a pretty precarious position to be in.
It definitely has its challenges. And that's why the Gnostics saw the psychic type as having enormous potential for growth. They've started the journey, they've begun to ask the right questions, but they still need to bridge the gap between intellectual understanding and direct experience.
Okay, that makes sense. So we've got the Hylics focused on the material, and the psychics caught in this mental and emotional exploration of spirituality. That leaves us with the final type, the pneumatics. And if I remember correctly, these are the ones who've kind of hit the spiritual jackpot, right?
You could say that. The pneumatics are the ones who have achieved true Gnosis,
Right.
that direct connection to the divine spark that Gnosticism is all about. The term itself comes from the Greek pneuma, which means spirit or breath.
Ah, that makes sense. They're breathing in the very essence of the spiritual realm. So they're not just seeking answers, they've actually found something, haven't they?
Exactly. Remember how the Gnostics believed that the material world was like a flawed copy, an illusion obscuring the true reality?
Yeah.
Well, the pneumatics are the ones who have seen through that illusion. They've pierced the veil and experienced the divine firsthand.
So they're not just reading about the spiritual world, they're living it, breathing it. That must be an incredible experience.
It's certainly what the Gnostics aspired to. And what's really interesting is they didn't see the pneumatic type as just about personal enlightenment. They believed pneumatics had a responsibility to help others awaken as well.
Oh, that's fascinating. So it's not enough to just achieve gnosis yourself. You have to share it, spread the light, so to speak.
That's right. They saw pneumatics as guides,
Yeah.
as mentors,
Yeah.
helping to illuminate the path for those who are still struggling in the shadows of the material world.
So they're like the spiritual trailblazers, leading the way for others to follow.
Exactly. And that brings us to a really important point about the Gnostic view of humanity. They didn't see these three types as fixed categories like boxes you're stuck in. Instead, they believed that everyone had the potential to evolve, to move along the spectrum from Hylic to psychic to pneumatic.
Okay. That makes me feel a lot less boxed in. So it's not about judging yourself or others based on where you are right now, but recognizing that we're all on this journey of spiritual growth and understanding.
Precisely. And that brings us to this quiz that you shared from one of the articles. It's designed to help you get a sense of which type you might lean towards.
Right. It's a fun way to explore these concepts and maybe spark some self-reflection. But before we get into that, I want to emphasize what you said earlier. It's not about getting hung up on a label. What matters is the journey itself. Right.
Absolutely. The quiz is just a starting point. The real work happens when we start to examine our own beliefs and motivations, to see where our focus lies and what truly drives us. And that exploration, that's where the real gnosis begins. And that's the beauty of this quiz. It's not about giving you a definitive answer, but rather prompting you to ask yourself some deeper questions. For example, one of the questions that really stood out to me was about how you view material possessions.
Oh, that's a good one. It gets right to the heart of that Hylic versus pneumatic spectrum we were talking about.
Exactly. And it's not just about whether you enjoy nice things, but rather what role they play in your life.
Right.
Do you see possessions as a source of security and status? Or do you see them as tools or maybe even distractions from what truly matters?
I can see how someone who's more Hylic might answer that very differently than someone who's leaning towards the pneumatic side. The Hylic might say, of course I value my possessions. They represent my hard work, my success, my comfort.
Right? And there's nothing inherently wrong with that. But the quiz encourages you to dig a little deeper. If you find yourself constantly striving for more, always feeling like you need the next big thing to be happy, well, that might be a sign that your focus is a bit too heavily on the material world.
Whereas someone with a more pneumatic outlook might say, my possessions are just things. They serve a purpose, but they don't define me. My true wealth lies in my spiritual connection, in my relationships, in my experiences.
Exactly, and that's a really key distinction. The Gnostics believe that true fulfillment comes not from external things, but from an inner awakening, from connecting with that divine spark within.
So it's not about denying yourself pleasure or living a life of poverty. It's about recognizing that true happiness comes from a different source, a source that can't be bought or sold.
Precisely. And that brings us to another interesting question from the quiz. What motivates your actions? Are you driven by pleasure, comfort, the desire for recognition? Or are you more motivated by curiosity, a thirst for knowledge, a longing for something deeper?
Now, at first glance, those might seem like very different motivations, but I'm wondering, is there any overlap?
Oh,
Could someone be motivated by both pleasure and a desire for spiritual growth?
that's a great question. And I think it gets to the heart of that spectrum idea we've been talking about. It's not like these are mutually exclusive categories. You could absolutely enjoy a delicious meal and at the same time appreciate it as a gift, a moment of connection to something bigger than yourself.
So it's about the intention behind the action, the underlying motivation.
Exactly. And that's where self-awareness comes in. The quiz is designed to help you become more conscious of those underlying motivations, to see what's truly driving you at a deeper level.
And I imagine that awareness is a crucial step on that path towards becoming more pneumatic, more in tune with that spiritual reality the Gnostics talked about.
Absolutely. It's about moving beyond those automatic reactions and habitual patterns and starting to act from a place of conscious choice, of alignment with your true self.
Okay. So we've talked about possessions, we've talked about motivations. What other thought-provoking questions does this quiz pose?
Well, one that I found particularly intriguing was about your attitude towards rules and laws. Do you see them as necessary for order and stability? Or do you tend to question them to see how they might limit freedom and creativity?
Now, that's a tricky one because on the one hand, we need some rules to function as a society. But on the other hand, I can see how clinging too tightly to those rules could stifle our spiritual growth, our ability to think outside the box and experience the world in new ways.
Right. And that's exactly the kind of dilemma that the Gnostics were grappling with. They saw the material world, with all its structures and systems, as a kind of trap, a place where people could easily become complacent and lose sight of their true potential.
So it's not about rejecting all rules and living in chaos. It's about finding that balance between order and freedom, between following the path and forging your own way.
Exactly. And that balance is going to look different for everyone. The important thing is to be aware of how rules and structures are impacting your life, your thinking, your ability to connect with that deeper spiritual reality.
And this ties into another question from the quiz, which I think is really the crux of it all. What role does spirituality play in your life?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? Because for some people, spirituality might not even be on their radar. They're so focused on the day-to-day, on work, family, bills, all those practical matters, that they haven't really stopped to consider the bigger picture. And then you have others who dabble in spirituality. They might read a few books, attend a yoga class, but it's still more of a side interest, something they compartmentalize from the rest of their lives.
Yeah.
Right. And then, of course, you have those for whom spirituality is the central guiding force. It permeates every aspect of their lives, their relationships, their work, their very way of being in the world.
And that sounds a lot like the pneumatic type we were talking about earlier, the ones who have fully integrated their spiritual understanding with their everyday lives.
Exactly. It's not about escaping the world, it's about transforming it, about seeing the divine in everything, in every moment, in every interaction.
So it's not just about having beliefs or practices, it's about embodying those beliefs, living them out in a way that aligns with your deepest truth.
Exactly. And that's a journey, a process of ongoing growth and discovery.
And one of the things I really appreciate about this quiz is it doesn't just ask you about your beliefs, it also asks you about how you approach learning and experiencing the world.
That's right. One of the questions asks whether you prefer, hands-on experience, or if you're more drawn to theoretical concepts and abstract ideas.
I can see how that would be relevant because someone who's very Hylic might be all about the practical, the tangible, the here and now.
Right.
They want to see results, they want to touch and feel and experience things directly.
Exactly. And that's a valid way of learning. But the Gnostics believed that true spiritual understanding went beyond just the physical senses.
Okay.
It required a deeper kind of knowing. A knowing that came from within.
So it's not that one way of learning is better than the other. It's just that they lead to different kinds of knowledge, different levels of understanding.
That's a great way to put it. And this ties into the Gnostic idea of Gnosis itself.
Mm-hmm.
Remember, Gnosis isn't just about accumulating facts or information.
Right.
It's about direct experiential knowledge,
Yeah.
A kind of intuitive knowing that transcends the limitations of the mind.
So it's like the difference between reading about swimming and actually jumping into the water. You can learn all the techniques and theories, but until you feel the water on your skin, until you experience that buoyancy and the resistance, you haven't truly grasped what it means to swim.
Exactly. And that's the beauty of Gnosticism. It's not a dogma. It's an invitation.
Yeah.
It's an invitation to explore, to experiment, to find your own path to that direct experience of the divine.
And that's what makes this whole discussion so fascinating. It's not about finding the right answer or fitting into a neat category.
Right.
It's about expanding our awareness, about questioning our assumptions, about challenging ourselves to go beyond the surface level of things.
And that challenge, that's where the real growth happens. That's where we start to tap into that pneumatic potential within ourselves, that capacity for wisdom, compassion, and connection to something larger than ourselves.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to encourage you to take some time to reflect on your own journey.
Mm.
Where do you find yourself on the spectrum of spiritual awareness? What practices or beliefs help you connect with that deeper reality?
Don't be afraid to ask the tough questions, to challenge your own assumptions, to explore different perspectives. And remember, the Gnostics believe that we're all capable of evolution, of moving towards that greater understanding of ourselves and the universe.
And that's what I love about this whole Gnostic approach. It's not about judgment or dogma, it's about empowerment. It's about recognizing that we have the power to shape our own spiritual destinies.
So go check out the full article and that quiz. We've just scratched the surface here. There's so much more to explore.
And most importantly, keep diving. Keep questioning, keep seeking. And who knows, you might just surprise yourself with what you discover along the way.